Hello and welcome to Module 3. Today's class we're going to be talking about early intervention law and today's regulations. And so this is stuff that's going to be really informative and help you out if you're thinking of early intervention as a career, or at least to understand if you're teaching, say, 3 to 5 year olds or even kindergarten and above. It's going to help you be able to understand what regulates what goes on with our younger kids. Because to me it's very important as a teacher to learn what not only comes before with our kids if we're teaching and what goes after our kids or students. I guess I should say a better word for that. But it's nice to see what's going on with them before we get them and when we let them go out of our classroom. So here we go with early intervention. So the first thing that you need to think about, that there are benefits with early intervention, okay? I will tell you, and we've kind of talked about some of these, but the benefits of early intervention are numerous. And first of all, it helps children with disabilities, which is what we're all about, right? That's our field. We want to help children that have disabilities to be able to overcome some of the things, or else help them learn a new way to do something. And so it really helps. It also helps the family, because the families are able to better reduce stress. Imagine, you have a regular child, and trust me, I have two that are pretty young, and it's often stressful already, right? You have just a typical kid. Add a disability onto that, and there are so many issues and many things that the family has to go through on top of just having a child. And so this early intervention helps benefit the family because it helps reduce the stress. I would also add to that it helps educate them about what's to come. Part of our job as an early interventionist is to try to tell the family and teach the family what happens next, right? If the child is 3 or turning 3 and going on to 3 to 5 services, how that's different and what that looks like. And so I think that benefit is there as well. That's also stress reduction and knowledge. Knowledge is power. I really believe that. Now, it benefits society. And I often have told you, follow the money. You've heard that before. Why would we go to early intervention? Because one, it does benefit society. It reduces the need for institutional placement. In the United States, there are a few still left, believe it or not. I worked with someone as less as 10 years ago that was still looking for an institution for their 1-year-old. So that does still exist, but it benefits because it reduces the need. And if you have a reduction in need for an institutional placement, one thing that's going to be nice is you have the child in their regular environment. And think of this, if we were all in an institution, if you were in a room, even if you were typical, even if you were as you are now, if you were in a room full of individuals that had autism and all they did all day was sit and hum and sit and flap, what would you do? Would you learn how to behave appropriately with other people? Probably not. And so that's something that is of great benefit to have individuals with disabilities in regular society, in their home. Think about the bonding that continues to occur with the parents. But if you also think about benefiting society, institutional placements are quite costly. You have the upkeep of the building, you have the electricity and other water utilities, that kind of thing. You have to hire staff, and a lot of staff too, right? Because you would have to have nursing staff, you'd have to have people there around the clock, caregivers, teachers. You'd have to have OTs and PTs and speech language pathologists and all that kind of thing. So you can see how that's going to be cost saving. Also, it reduces the need for special education. There are kids that go through early intervention that go on to not need special education, and that's awesome. That's really what we want if we can have that. And even if that isn't the case, we can help make it to where the child needs less special education. And by that I mean a great example. One of my friends has a daughter named Chloe. You may hear me talk about Chloe in different classes and in this class later on. Chloe has Down syndrome. Chloe she started reading at 3. They used a direct instruction approach. I know, not very early childhood friendly, but it worked for her. And she's now around 10 years old, and she is and has always been in the regular classroom. Had she not had the early intervention, she may have had to be in, say, resource, or she may have had to have even been in a classroom where it was more self-contained. But because she had early intervention and parents and professionals that really, really worked hard with her, you can see how it reduced her need for special education, and that in turn saves money for the community and for the government. So you can see how the benefits of intervention, if you follow the money, they're there for the money. They're there for the kid and the parents as well. So, learning disabilities in children with preschool. We often don't see learning disability diagnosed at preschool. In fact, that's something that you need to really understand, that learning disabilities are only caught when the child is what? Learning to start to read, right? And so that being the case, they do not have that diagnosis in preschool. However, you often will see kids that have indications that there might be some academic failure or deficits, okay? And if they have deficits in the following things that are listed, that, is a better chance of the child having a learning disability once they become older. And you can see how communication and oral language skills are going to be a precursor to that. If you can't speak it, if you can't say it, if you can't understand what's going on, that could mean that it's going to be very difficult to read it. Phonological awareness is the same, okay? I have a little kid right now, a little guy that that's my son, and he's 2, and he says, whoa, right? He's not saying the Y. Now, that's basically fine and totally appropriate for him. But imagine if he always said whoa, right? With a W, not a Y, right? How is he going to be able to read the Y? How is he going to be able to read and decode words, right? That's going to be a problem. Rapid naming skills, okay? And the rapid naming skills are when you can name something quickly. You see it and you can put a word to that. If you don't have that quick rapid naming, you can see where you're going to have a hard time learning to read as well. See, they're tied together. Knowledge of the alphabet. If we don't have that knowledge of the alphabet, again, how are we going to be able to identify it when we see it? Now, I'll tell you, young children often have an issue with B and D, and because you got to think of this. Whenever we first start reading, right? Whenever we see something like a truck is always a truck, no matter how you turn that truck. However, if you have a B, a D, a P, and a Q, all lowercase, right? Think of that. Those are all the same symbol, just turned in an opposite direction. If you don't know that, then you're going to be calling the wrong thing. You might be trying to pronounce them incorrectly when you see them. Visual motor integration is also a problem, and of course that can go with handwriting, right? Being able to integrate visual and writing, being able to scan and various things with the vision is going to cause issues with reading. Fine and gross motor skills can also be an issue with that. The child that has the really, really poor handwriting, right? If we can't control our hands to do the handwriting, it's going to be a lot harder to write those, and it could cause a dysgraphia kind of thing, which is a learning disability, right? A hard time writing. And then, of course, social skills. We don't really think of that as tying in, but it does. Because if you see kids with these deficits whenever they are young, there is a better chance of them having a learning disability later on. I will also tell you that there is often greater risk of having a learning disability if you spent time in the NICU. A baby that spent time in the NICU is in there for various reasons. And again, going back to my family, I feel like we all build knowledge on what we have learned or what we've lived with and know before. But I have a nephew that aspirated amniotic fluid whenever he was born, and they didn't catch it till he was about to go home. This was during the time period when they were sending women home a day after having their child. And so he aspirated the amniotic fluid, and he was breathing funny. My sister noticed that, but he didn't get help until the second day, right? And they rushed him to the NICU, and he was there for a week with breathing issues and that kind of thing. These kinds of things often cause slight damage or a soft brain issue, right? Something happened. It's a soft damage. And what that comes out to later on is a higher chance of a learning disability. And in fact, this child does have a learning disability. So, those are things that if you are teaching with younger kids, you're going to look at and say, I can see why this child might have a learning disability later on. So preschool children, 3 or 5, and this is, a little older age than we're looking at, they may have developed delay in one or more of the areas, and you can see the areas there. Now, and I'm hoping that you know the areas. Physical development, that's going to be your occupational and physical therapy. I'm hoping you know the difference. If you think about it, physical therapy tends to deal more with the legs or large muscle groups, whereas occupational therapy deals more with small muscle groups and often the hands. And it is often that hand-eye coordination, feeding, which you may not think of, but they do deal with that, and writing and those kinds of things. Cognitive development, of course, is mental capacities and what you can do with your brain. Communication development, how we talk, how we perceive what we read. We often don't think about communication that way, or perceive what we see. And listening skills, that kind of thing. Social or emotional development, and of course that is how we behave and interact with others, right? And adaptive development, that's the feeding and eating and potty training and things like that, cleaning up after ourselves, taking care of ourselves. So these are the kinds of things that preschoolers could have a delay in. Okay. Now, with the legislation, whenever we looked at IDEA, here are the things that it says. That when they reauthorized it, they continue to see early childhood special education policies and practices incorporated into earlier laws. What that means is we're still going to uphold the laws that we had. 99-457, as I've said, is a really, really huge, big deal. Woohoo! 99-457, don't forget that one, right? That's the one that gave the right to infants and toddlers, birth through age 2, to have services. Now, remember how I said to read those, okay? So it's public law, right, 99-457. The other one's public law 102-119. Which one do you think came first? I am hoping you're thinking in your mind that 99-457 came first, because it did. And remember, it's the 99th Congress, it's earlier. So whenever you're taking praxis or whenever you're thinking about this, again, go and look at your test. If you think, oh, that's an earlier law, then you'll know it needs to have a lower number, right? And the first number there. So there's 2 age groups of young children with disabilities, okay? There's preschoolers, which are defined ages 3 through 5, and there's infants and toddlers. And this says birth it should say birth through 2. What that means is basically one goes from birth to 35 months, the other one picks up at 36 months or 3 years and goes to 5 years of age, right? And these 2 groups have different things going on with the law, okay? And so we're going to look at that. First of all, preschoolers with disabilities. Each state must provide a free, appropriate public education and related services to all children who are eligible with disability ages 3 through 5. So every state was mandated to do this, and they were mandated to do this in which law? Can you remember? Or do you know? It's in 99-457, right? We have talked about that, and that's why this is a big deal, right? So children with disabilities 3 through 5 have to have, are mandated that each school system must provide those services. Now, with infants and toddlers, Part C, the services are not mandated, but the federal government gives financial assistance to states through grants to provide services age birth through 2. Currently, all states provide those services. And again, why do they do that? Because they don't have to, right? If you think about it, follow the money, right? It is cheaper to provide services at birth through 2 in hopes that things can change, and also because we're getting help for things that we need help with, and so again, cheaper to educate the children. Okay. Now, something else you got to think of whenever you're thinking of why birth through 2 services. Okay. Say a child has a speech impediment. Okay, I worked with a child's cousin. Now, the cousin is the one that I worked with. The cousin had fetal alcohol syndrome. But this child was in the home as well. The grandparents were keeping both children. And this child was about 3.5, and he talked like this. He would go, da-boo-ra-fa, okay? And da-boo-ra-fa means the brown rabbit ran fast, okay? There's all kinds of issues there, right? Where he's leaving out sounds, he's substituting other sounds. He called his cousin Alu, okay? And Alu is Alex. So you can hear there again, he's substituting the oo sound for X. Well, we approached the parents knowing that he could use services and asked, could we, would they be interested in testing? Would they be interested in services? And they declined. And again, at this age group, you have the right to decline. You can decline till a child hits 5, okay? And so they declined services, and their statement was, we think he's cute the way he talks, and he'll get enough school when he gets into school, when he gets 5. Well, you got to think about it. This child is now going to have 5 years to practice incorrectly how to do something. Think about how much longer it's going to take him to correct his language, if he ever does, right? Than if we'd have caught him at 2.5, even 3, and he would have had less years to develop it plus more intervention. So that's one of the reasons you see why states do this, even though they're not mandated to do it. They're given incentives to do it. Now, something else that's very different between these two age groups is that at 3 to 5, we have the IEP. And I'm hoping you know what that is, right? IEP, Individual Education Plan, right? Well, in birth through 2, we have an Individualized Family Service Plan, okay? Now think, what is different about those two laws, or those two terms, I guess I should say? Well, the IEP, right, doesn't mention family. The IFSP has family in it. In fact, people that do early intervention, like I used to, say that an IEP is just like an IFSP, but they left the family out. And that's pretty much the case, okay? In birth to 2, through 2, we are very encompassing of the family, and anything that's good for the family is good for the child. Think about this. Dad doesn't have his GED. If we assist Dad in getting his GED, you can imagine how that's going to help the family income and that kind of thing, okay? If Mom doesn't have her driver's license and she can't drive anywhere, especially in our rural areas, right? In our state, there's not a huge public transportation system, probably in any city. Maybe Memphis or Nashville has a pretty good one, but I've lived in Knoxville and in Johnson City, and we have one, but it's not utilized a lot. And, it's not like a really big city where in another 5 minutes, another subway car is going to come by or a bus is going to come by. So if you can't drive, that's a real problem here, right? And so we feel that what's good for the family is good for the child, so therefore we can write in the plan to help Mom get her driver's license, so therefore she can go places, she can drive the car to take the children's places. So you can see how there's a difference in these two plans, and we'll talk more about that later on. But I just wanted you to be aware that there is a big difference, not only in the name, but in the philosophy of the document. Okay? Now, here we go. This is kind of a side-by-side comparison of preschoolers and infants and toddlers, right? And preschoolers, again, are under the IEP, and toddlers are under the IFSP, right? Now, with preschoolers, it's under Part B of the law, okay? And under Part B of the law, it's mandatory. So, states must provide services 3 to 5, right? Part C, it's permissive, meaning that they're going to give incentives to do birth through 2. And again, all states take advantage of this, which is wonderful. And then 3 through 5 is the age group of a preschooler. Birth through 2, right, not to 24 months, but to 36 months, is the age group of the infants and toddlers. And then under the plan, you have an IFSP for infants and toddlers. It could be an IEP or an IFSP 3 to 5. I can tell you that in other states, they utilize the IFSP in the 3 to 5 more than Tennessee. In Tennessee, you rarely see an IFSP for a 3 through 5 age child. And that's just kind of the way it is. I think it is more more typical in 3 to 5 to have an IEP instead of an IFSP. Because when they turn 3, the services tend to not be provided in the home as much, and it's almost like we say, here, we will take the child and we will work on the child, right? And so the services become more child-focused instead of family-focused. Okay, and you can see then how transition can be very hard sometimes when you build this close personal relationship with families in birth through 2, and then they go out into the 3 to 5 services, and it's very different, right? So here's other things that are different. The lead agency. Okay, it says that in preschoolers, it's often the state education agency, and that is in every instance that I know of. Now, in infants and toddlers, the governor appoints the agency. Now, the governor can appoint the education agency to be the birth through 2 service provider, or they can appoint someone else. In Tennessee, it is the education agency. However, it wasn't always that way. It was the Department of Mental Health and Mental Retardation that provided birth through 2 services. So again, now you can see if a governor chooses to do a different agency to look over what's going on in this age group, how the transition can be really rocky when they go from birth through 2 to 3 to 5. Now, transition. Again, in transition, preschoolers go to a general classroom or special ed program, meaning when they hit 5, they're going to kindergarten, and they either go to a regular kindergarten or they go to a special ed program if they still have those needs. Now, in infants and toddlers, the only place that they can be transitioned to is going to be either an inclusive preschool or a special ed preschool. And I can tell you too, because of the way that we look at the difference in disability, some kids will qualify for birth through 2, but they don't qualify for the 3 to 5 program. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a child that had hydrocephalus. Now, we know hydrocephalus can cause cognitive issues. Nowadays, though, we have a thing called a shunt, and it's kind of like a valve. It runs right through here on the back of the skull of the child. And what it does is hydrocephalus is caused from too much brain fluid, right, around the brain. And with this, it is siphoned off into the body, and the body excretes it as waste. So whenever we have that going on, often we don't see a lot of effects of hydrocephalus. However, we, in our state of Tennessee, have written it in law that we're going to serve the children with hydrocephalus, kind of as a safety net. It's kind of, we're providing them services and that kind of thing. When they hit 3 to 5, if they test them and they don't qualify, meaning they don't have a delay, then they're not going to receive services anymore. This is kind of eye-opening to some parents. I've had children who had autism that qualified at birth to 3, but when they went to the 3 to 5 program and were tested, they didn't qualify any longer. And that another issue with this can be that in infants and toddlers, at least in our state, other states do it differently, in our state, the 3 to 5 program does a hardcore test, and you have to have so many standard deviations below typical, okay? And in infants and toddlers, we do percent delay, and that can be very different. You can have a percentage of delay, but it not be within that standard deviation. So that's why sometimes kids go infants and toddlers and then don't receive services as preschoolers. But the general thing that happens is that a birth through age 2 child will then go into the special ed preschool or an inclusive preschool. Now, the orientation, again, in preschoolers, we're looking at the development and mental learning of a child. So the focus is on the child, okay? In infants and toddlers, the focus is on families, parent and child interaction. We're kind of looking at it as a system together. We'll talk more about that system later on too. So you can see again how the focus is very different from services for these. Now, who funds Part C services? Okay. There is approximately $436 million, and they're serving approximately 350,000 children in the United States, okay? The states administer it, but it's paid for by the picture of Uncle Sam should be a clue. You guessed it, it's the federal government. If you remember, we talked about earlier how the federal government gives monies to states to do the Part C, so that's what they're talking about here. The states administer it how they see fit, however, it's paid for by the federal government, okay? Who pays for services? Along with the federal government, it could be insurances. So if the child has OT, PT, or speech that is needed, or a nurse that is needed, a nutritionist, various things like that, if the parents have insurance, what will happen is that insurance will pay, okay? And so that is how they're going to bill first. They're going to try to bill the parents' insurance. Now, also, in some states, they have a sliding scale payment. Kentucky is an example of this. In Kentucky, they base your services on your income, meaning that if you have a child that has a disability and you make $10,000 a year, all of your services are probably free. If you have a child with a disability whose parent's income is $300,000 a year, then they may have to pay something like $45 every time someone comes out to see the child. That is not the case in Tennessee. It's not the case in West Virginia. It just is certain states, and it depends on the state you live in as to how that state chooses to handle it. Now, other places that can pay can be charities, okay? Often the Lions Club are really, really good to pay for hearing aids. Okay, Shriners Hospital, if the child needs equipment, needs some kind of surgeries, or a lot of it's orthopedic kind of things, then the Shriners will pay for that. They even will send a bus to pick you up, put you up in housing somewhere, pay for your meals. You don't have to pay for a thing. And so charities are often used whenever that is needed. Now, birth to 36 months, we have a payer of last resort, okay? And what that means is they pay if no one else will pay. Okay, so what they're going to do is they're going to try the insurance first, then they're going to try the charities, they're going to try various things, and if no one else can pay, then they will pay for it. Okay, in Tennessee, that's Tennessee's Early Intervention System. Now, in one of your modules, you're going to learn all about the Tennessee's Early Intervention System, so be prepared for that coming up. And so when you have that module, you'll learn more about it. And in Tennessee, they're the payer of last resort, and they are the system, they're the agency that's been put in place to govern and to look over birth through 2 services. So, what regulations are in place? There are some regulations that has to happen. One is that the family has to be engaged. We want them to be active participants. This has kind of changed philosophies in the years, and there is kind of more than one philosophy in this, and that is that, one, we want to teach the parents, right? Because if I'm coming in and working with that child only 1 hour a week, all right, they're getting that 1 hour, which is great. But imagine if mom were doing some of the same things, if I helped her understand how to do it and what to do and why. I think why is very important. Then she's going to hopefully actively participate. And me trying to teach a child to walk once a week is going to be very different than me doing that, but then when I'm not there, the parent also using some of my techniques to get the child to walk. So we are trying to get the parents to be actively involved, okay? I will tell you too, though, sometimes there's a parent that is at wit's end that needs a break, okay? And I wouldn't suggest doing this every time you visit, but sometimes if that's the case, letting the parent go take a shower, go have 10 minutes by themselves, that kind of thing, it is important, right, for them to do that. And so sometimes they're not always there right exactly with you the whole entire time, but we do want the parents to participate. Also, the family needs to be engaged in that they have the knowledge of their rights and their choices, okay? In birth through 2, we want them to have choices, okay? So that can mean that I don't like this physical therapist, we don't get along, or I don't understand them and what they're saying. They have the right to have another physical therapist come in, okay? And then also about their choices. Do you want to have therapy in the home, or do you want to go somewhere to have therapy at the physical therapy center, okay? And there's different philosophies about that, right? Some people think, oh, we need to go to the physical therapy center because if we go there, they have all the equipment. And you're right. However, then the parents sometimes don't understand how to incorporate that in their home. I don't have a big ball that the child can sit on and bounce to help with balance. And so sometimes if you put it in the home and the physical therapist uses the things that are in the home, like say a child that needs to be up on their tummy and the physical therapist rolls up a towel to put under their arms so the child can lay and play that way, then the mom sees that and says, I can do that, and she'll roll towels and do that. So you can see how there can be advantages and disadvantages to both, but the parents need to have the knowledge to make the choices that they want that's right for their family. Okay? Child find. Every state has a child find agency. That was part of the law. Okay? And it is a central directory of services that is available to the public. Okay? And In the Child Find Services in Tennessee, again, it is Tennessee's early intervention system. Their job is to go out there and inform people that these services are out there. And if you think you have a child that is in need, then you need to call us. Okay, and that's how it works. In fact, if you were going to go to a health department or possibly a pediatrician's office, or I've even seen it in daycares, there might be a sign there saying, do you think your child is not talking like they should? Are they not walking as other children their age? Why don't you call us and blah, 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 blah. And it's a 1-800 number. And so that way we can find those children that have disabilities or delays and need services. Okay. Another thing that Child Find does is that they provide info about preschools at least 90 days before their 3rd birthday. Okay. So we're trying to, again, inform parents. All right. They're going to turn 3. Here are preschool services that are available. Let's look at them. Let's try to do that. And then there's a 45-day timeline for services. What that means is if a parent calls and says, I think that my child has a disability, that starts a clock. And there are 45 days. And within that 45 days, the child needs to be tested, and it might be by various people, not just one person, to determine whether that child does in fact have a delay or a disability and needs services. Okay? Now, evaluations and assessments. The first thing that happens often whenever we have a child that again, the parents call, or anybody can call. A grandparent can call, a doctor can call, right? But then we have to get permission from the parent before anything happens, right? After that initial call is made, often there's a screening, and this could be over the phone, it could be in person. And with the screening, and it is optional, it says there, but with the screening, what happens is somebody comes in and does kind of a quick and dirty assessment about what the child's doing. And based on the screening, they determine, oh, this child's going to need to be seen by a speech-language pathologist because there's some language issues I'm seeing. And I think that an occupational therapist needs to evaluate this child. And so what will happen in that screening is it'll determine what other evaluations and assessments need to occur. Okay? Now, before we screen, there has to be prior written notice. Okay, so parents have to give their permission, and the parents are given the results of the screening. So therefore, if a child doesn't qualify, they're saying, here's the results of your screening, your child is scoring typical in all of these areas, and we're not going to do a further evaluation. Or we're seeing some things that cause us concern on this screening in speech, in OT, and we think just a general development assessment is needed. Okay, so as I said, a screening often leads to the evaluation, right on the next slide. And so with an evaluation, you have a 45-day window to assess and have the IFSP meeting. This is what I told you earlier. When a parent calls, that starts a clock going. So within the time period of 45 days, there should be a screening and then an evaluation, and all these evaluations occur. Okay? The assessments must be multidisciplinary. What does that mean? Think about it. Discipline, okay, different disciplines, many, right? So what that means is if a child has a disability, me going in as a developmental specialist, right, as the special educator, I can test a child and may find various things, but we need someone else to go in and say, yes, they're seeing this too. Right? And also what that means is a child's not eliminated just because one says, oh, I see nothing in PT, so therefore we don't need to test anywhere else, right? Oh, but we see stuff in language, or we see stuff in this. And so we want a team to evaluate that child, as many people that are necessary, right, to evaluate that child, to see where their skills, their strengths and their weaknesses are within the different evaluations. Also, something that you need to know is that the evaluation and assessment must be in the child's native language. Now, why would we do that? You got to think. The native language is what they're used to hearing and seeing. Is it fair? Think about this. If I were in China, would it be fair for someone that is in China to give me an assessment in Chinese? I know not a lick of Chinese. I would fail it completely, right? If we don't give it in our native language, then what's going on is we are often making that child have a disability, or the child will test as having a disability even though they might not, okay? And so we want it to be done to be fair, to be in their native language, okay? Eligibility. There are ways to get eligible for this, okay? There are kids that are at risk. Okay, and the child may not have a delay, but they have to have those biological or environmental factors to receive services. This can be anything from the child that had hydrocephalus, right? Or it could be that they're in a home that has some issues, like maybe lead in the paint, or it could be lead pipes going into the home, that kind of thing. Then those kids are going to, and there's a list of things that are eligible, they're going to be able to have services because of that. It could be a diagnosed condition, okay? This is a list as well. They don't have to have a delay. I've told you that earlier, but they will receive services. Diagnosed conditions can be a lot of things. They've been diagnosed with autism. They've been diagnosed with hydrocephalus. They've been diagnosed with Down syndrome, okay? Like in the instance of my friend's child, Chloe, right? She was diagnosed with Down syndrome and had a lot of services, and she may or may not have shown the delay, but the condition, we know that delay or disability often goes with that condition, so therefore we're going to provide services. And then we have eligibility at delay, okay? And what that means is after the child's been assessed, they are shown to have delay in certain areas, and then they receive services. Now, each state defines what delay is for them, okay? In the state of Tennessee, you have to have 25% delay in 2 areas, okay? Or you have to have a 40% delay in 1 area, okay? Now, what does that mean? That's kind of vague, right? Let's think of it this way. We'll use 10 months because that's easier to factor, right? It's easier to look at. If a child has, say, a 45% delay in communication and they're 10 months old, that means their communication skills is about the age of a what? Think about it, 40%. It's about a 6-month-old, right? So you can see that's quite delayed. 50% is half. That means you're acting half your age, or your speaking ability is half the age, okay? Now, 25% in 2 areas. That's pretty significant too, because we know that there's kind of a compounding effect, more than 1 area, right, compounding. And so 25% delay. That means a child that is 10 months old is acting or has the ability of a child that is 7.5 months old. So you can see how significant it can be to have the delay. And again, whenever you have the module on Tennessee's early intervention system, you're going to learn more about how we define this in our state. Okay, an IFSP, okay? Now, to have an IFSP, the practitioner must be qualified to do the job, okay? Now, what that means is if they're a PT, an OT, or a speech-language pathologist, they must have the license, okay? I will tell you in Tennessee, you have to have a degree. It does not necessarily mean that you have certification to provide birth through 3. It's always great if you do have that, but we want them to be qualified. They have, the practitioner must be knowledgeable. They also want to use scientifically based research, and this we also call evidence-based practice. Now, why would we want scientifically based research? Okay. These kids, we only have a small window. And if we're saying, oh, let's try this method, it doesn't have anything to back it up, but we're going to try it with that child. Is that a good choice when you know you only have a short amount of time? No, we want to use methods that we know have clear evidence that they work, because then we know we're not wasting our time with that child or with that family. Okay, transition. Now, we really, really want a smooth transition in birth to 3 that go into 3 to 5 services, and a really smooth transition from 3 to 5 services to kindergarten. In reality, these transitions are a lot rougher than we would like them to be. And in part, it's because communication is lacking sometimes, right? But it's hard. We're all doing our own job in our own area. And so it's very hard to sit down and communicate. And often the state doesn't pay you financially as much by sitting down and doing that. So what you have to do is that there's interagency notification by 2nd birthday, if possible. If not, it has to be there 90 days before the 3rd birthday. So what that means is if you have a child that has a disability that you've been working with, when they turn 2, we're going to tell the state agency, we're going to tell the education system, hey, we have a child with a disability. He's 2 now, but we think he's probably going to need services once he turns 3. We do this because that allows them to realize, oh, we have all these kids, we may need another teacher, right? That kind of thing. Also, we have to do it by 90 days. And often this happens if, say, a child is caught before they are 3, but after they're 2. So an example of this is sometimes we see a lot of kids that have speech language issues, and they pop up sometimes around 2.5, that kind of thing. Well, that's a child that would hit it has to happen before 90 days. Now, there is a transition meeting, okay? And this is where everybody comes together and meets and talks, okay? And if I know that I'm handing them over to the special ed preschool, then we'll meet and talk with them. If there are a different possibility of services, then we might have all agencies together. An example of this is that we had a child that was turning 3 that I worked with that could qualify for Head Start, okay? Or she could qualify for 3 to 5 services at the school system. We invited both, okay? Now, the good thing about Head Start, of course, is that she's going to be in an inclusive setting, okay? They ran buses. They didn't have as much time in the classroom as the 3 to 5 classroom, meaning the day is shorter or longer. And then the 3 to 5 services had a bus that would come pick them up. The days would be longer, and she would get summer services and that kind of thing. Now, it wasn't my choice as to where she went. This particular child had a mother who was schizophrenic and a father who had stopped working so that he could take care of this child that had a disability and the mother that had schizophrenia. The child was never diagnosed with anything. There were global delays, meaning in all areas she was kind of delayed, but we didn't know why. Some of us suspected a syndrome. Dad did not want to test, okay? She was so delayed, I felt the best placement for her would be the special ed program. Plus, knowing that Dad could go back to work and Mom could go to a day program to be cared for, that he would mean more income for the family, various things like that. I was kind of pushing for that. However, it was ultimately the parent's choice. He chose Head Start, okay? And that's fine, and that's where the child went. So that way, when we have that transition meeting, any of the choices that are available are going to be often at that meeting, right? Now, there's also a transition plan, and this happens 9 months to 90 days before the 3rd birthday. And of course, it depends on how we're doing it and what's going on. And with the transition plan, it may mean things like the birth through 2 agencies going to get all the paperwork to the 3 to 5 agency. The child and the family are going to visit the placement or the possible placements that are going to occur. There's going to be a plan of how we're going to ease that child into the next services, okay? There's also a transition plan even if the child does not qualify for pre-K services. And again, this can be like a child that I knew that had autism. And in our transition plan for her, it was we're going to give Mom all the paperwork. We're going to give Mom the information to the 3 to 5 program if she suspects that there is an issue. We're going to give Mom a list of possible daycares if she is interested in having that child go to a daycare. So you can see how there is still a plan. We don't just say, okay, see ya, bye. We try to figure out where the family is heading, what they're going to want, and whether they're going to go into services or they're going to go into their own choice of services and daycares, and that we're going to do that. So we can still serve a child if they're above 3, if the birthday is at the end of the school year, or something like that. So what that means is, like, say I have a child that turns 3 in April, and they are going to start the school year only to end it a month later. There may or may not be summer school. Then the birth through 3 agency can say, we're going to continue to see this child until August when school starts so that there's a smoother transition, right? So you can see why that would be a better, smoother transition and why we might choose to do that. So the state agency, this is the process, and we've kind of talked about this before. There's a child find where we're increasing public awareness, we're locating the children. Then after that, we're going to screen those kids, right? And we screen them to see if they need a more in-depth assessment. Then they diagnose and evaluate, right? So we're going to diagnose, determine the extent of the delay. We're going to plan for the intervention and then evaluate. How are we doing? What kind of transitions do we need, and that kind of thing. So this is kind of the step-by-step process of the assessment, okay? So, and we'll go over this again really quickly. Child find, I guess, is the first phase, this is where we're increasing public awareness of services. This is where we communicate to try to find those kids. We find them at birth to 3. We also find them at 3 to 5. Let them know, because a lot of people don't know that preschool can occur in the public schools. So we're actively seeking individuals with disabilities to be able to provide services. Then there's a screening, right? And again, it's usually it's a quick kind of thing. Does the child pass? Do they not pass? And if they do well on the screening, then maybe they don't need further assessment. If there's a question or they do poorly on the screening, then they're assessed. So the third phase is after they've been screened, they're going to be diagnosed with something. They're going to have to get a label, right, to have services, which we hate that, but how else are we going to do that? So we have to have a thorough evaluation by different people to determine the problems and whether they need special ed services or not, okay? Then evaluating. This is after we've given them services, after we have started to give intervention to the individual, we're going to evaluate and see whether they should remain in the program or whether they shouldn't, right, before they're 3, or if they should go on to the 3 to 5 program or not, and then planning for what's going to happen. So we evaluate a child every 6 months. So why do you think in birth to 3? In 3 to 5, we evaluate a child every year. So why do you think we're evaluating a child every 6 months in birth to 3 and on a yearly basis in 3 to 5? Think about that for a moment. Why would we do every 6 months? Think about how rapid development occurs with children that are in the birth to 3 age group. And with that rapid development, we're looking at them every 6 months to see, can they do this, can they do that? Because they're developing skills, we may need to change our focus on what we're doing with that child. Maybe they're gaining skills pretty rapidly and we need to make new goals, right? So you can see why we do it every 6 months. The IEPs are mandated by law to do it yearly. And again, it's often because the progress is a little slower. It's not as rapid development, right? And so we're going to do that yearly. Now, there are 3 different categories of risk, and here they are: established risk, biological risk, and environmental risk. And let's look at those. Established risk is those that are established diagnosis of developmental delay or have results in disability or developmental delay. So established risk are the kids that we test, and we know for sure that those kids have a delay or a disability, and so therefore we're going to go on and give them, we've established that they're at risk, and we're going to give them services. Now, a biological risk are the children who have a diagnosed physical or mental condition, right, which often have a high probability that cause developmental delay. And it says here very low birth weight. Premature babies would be a biological risk, right? My nephew that swallowed the amniotic fluid, he was probably a biological risk, although he didn't receive services and we didn't think about it at the time, even though this is my field. There are things that occur that make them a risky category, and it's biological things, therefore they're going to have services. And then environmental risk. These are, and you can see here, parental abuse, extreme poverty, intellectual impairment by the parents, low parental education, child abuse, neglect. Those are the kinds of things that you see environmental risk, as well as something in the environment like lead or mercury or something like that. Okay, now, developmentally appropriate practice, DAP. You will see this often with the National Association for Education of Young Children, okay? And what developmentally appropriate practice means is that there's a set of guidelines for curriculum for typical developing children. Okay, and what they're saying is, here is what a child of this age group should be learning. This is a developmental practice for this child. And so this kind of guides what we're going to teach the children. But also, not only is it something that this is what is appropriate for typical children, we also, in developmentally appropriate practice, have to have individually appropriate right? And so that takes in often our kids that have a delay, right? And so, but we want to look for skills, and we're working with children on skills that they should be working on for their age group. This is kind of harder to see sometimes with young children. But think of it this way, okay? If we didn't do a developmentally appropriate practice and the child was, say, 5, then that might mean that they're working a one-shaped puzzle that is boring for their age group, whereas it would be very entertaining and highly challenging for a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, but for a 5-year-old, not so much, right? It's kind of like, say, a child that is 21 still coloring books and watching Mickey Mouse, when we want them to do something that's more age appropriate, right? So developmentally appropriate practice means that we're looking for things that are age appropriate for that child, and we're working on getting that child to do things that are age appropriate. So, something I want you to think about is the brain, its structure and its function, okay? All human behavior is mediated by the brain and the nervous system, which you know, okay? And this is how we learn activities. This is how we are able to do things like scratch our head or like walk, right? And the brain is the thing that occurs or makes that happen. Okay. Now, there's 2 cerebral hemispheres in the brain. Okay. So I want you to think of how the brain, you've probably seen it, right, on TV or somewhere else, and it has 2 hemispheres. There's a left brain and a right? And when you really look at it, it looks like it's almost identical. Okay. However, it's not. Each one contains all these different lobes that are listed, and the different lobes are responsible for what occurs, okay, and how each brain, what happens. The frontal lobe that you see there on both hemispheres is often the brain part that is more advanced. It is our more advanced thinking. It is our, how to be civilized, that kind of thing. And then the other lobes have different things. There's a motor area, right? So that controls our motor ability. And it's kind of like if you have somebody that has a stroke and it happens in one of these areas, then they might have different things that happen, right? If there's a stroke in the motor area, that's going to affect their motor, right? If they have one in the frontal lobe area, it might affect their ability, like to read or to think, like the filter that we all have, the thing where you think something but you're not going to say it because that would be mean. The frontal lobe, if they have a stroke, then that might be gone. So they'll say that thing, right? An example of that is my mom had a stroke in the frontal lobe, and she came and visited us right after she had it, and my husband had a birthday. We had a new house, and the new house was an old house, had a lot of stairs, and so in the birthday card that she sent to my husband, it said, happy birthday, Elias. We hope you had a great birthday. I really liked coming to see your house, although it has too many steps and you could use a wind chime or 2, okay, for the outside. Now, we laughed at that, but that's something that you don't normally write in a birthday card, right? And so you can see the damage to her frontal lobe has taken away her ability to not say exactly what's on her mind, right? So you can see how that is. Okay, right brain and left brain. Although the 2 halves are identical, they're different in the function, and we see these, okay, in life, left brain and right brain, and you, of course, probably know some of this. The left brain controls language-related activities for more than 90% of us, okay? The left brain controls language, okay? And it doesn't matter whether you're left or right-handed or if you're ambidextrous, right? It's located in the left for 98% of right-handed people and about 71% of left-handed people. So less left-handed people have it in the left. Do you see that? That's very interesting, isn't it? And you do realize that we are hardwired to be opposite. So the left hemisphere of the brain, and I'm sure this is probably backwards, it's my left, controls the right side of the body, and the right side controls the left side of the body. So it's kind of like we're crossing over, right? So that's what it does. You see language in that area. The right hemisphere deals with nonverbal stimulation, music, math, spatial perception, body awareness. That's all located in the right hemisphere of the brain, okay? Now, they think that some people tend to be more left-brained and other people tend to be more right-brained, okay? Left brain is usually strong in verbal and language skills, and right-brained is usually strengths in spatial, artistic, and mechanical skills, Okay, so you can see how we might be preferring to do one thing or the other. I will tell you that whenever I was in, I guess, my undergraduate program, and I was in, I think, a biology class, and we were talking about differences in left and right brain, and they were saying that left-handed people, which again are often controlled by the right part of the brain, right? They often go into more of the math and sciences sometimes. And so he asked all of us, that were left-handed to raise our hand, and there were a lot of us in there, more than the general population. And he was trying to prove that, the way this goes. So interestingly enough, I was pre-med, then I switched to English, which would have been more of a left brain. So I don't know, maybe we use both sides of our brains too, right? Of course. So we'll go on. One thing we need to know about motor learning, and this is how we move, right? All of our learning begins with motor learning, okay? Think of this. Think of that little bitty baby, okay? I want you to see that baby in their mind. They're laying on their back and they're kicking their arms and their legs, okay? Think of that. And they're crying, all right? And there's something in their environment and all of a sudden they hit it. And it's like, what did I do? I hit the jungle gym that I'm laying under and I made it move, okay? And after a while, they hit it again by accident and it makes music or something. Well, after a while, they start learning that, hey, if I move my hand in a certain way, this is going on, right? Also with sing, think about it. Sing is a motor thing to do, okay? Sing is what makes us want to crawl out or to reach out and, hey, what is that? I want to touch it. Kind of idea, okay? Now, there's a natural sequence of developmental motor stages. A natural sequence, developmental. Who do we think of when we talk about developmental? Ding, 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 Piaget, right? So, Piaget is going to have, he's talked about how there's a natural sequence. There's in cognitive and everything. There's a natural sequence on how we do this, okay? And so, many areas of academic and cognitive performance are based on successful motor experiences, okay? And by that, we mean because we were able to do that with the little mobile hanging above us, we hit something in it and it made it play music, well then we're learning cause and effect. So you can see how a motor skill goes on to create a understanding of a more cognitive skill. Okay, so perception. This is our ability to both recognize and integrate internal stimuli, okay? And it's a learned skill, which means that it's taught, okay? So we have to recognize and integrate the external stimuli. It's kind of like here. You all probably can't see it, but I can see all of these lights. I can see a microphone hanging above my head to help pick up sound better, right? And because of that, I'm aware of these things. Yet, the microphone helps me know that this is the middle and I need to kind of stand in the middle so that as we are recording these, you don't have me over here the whole entire time and I'm off center, right? And so I use that to help me know that that's going on. So I recognize that it's a microphone and I'm integrating it in what I'm doing with you all, okay? So it's a learned skill, however. If I didn't realize that was a microphone, if I wasn't perceptive enough to know that it's hanging over my head, I wouldn't be able to use it in such a way. So you can see how perception is very important in what we do, how we perceive things. Okay, perceptual motor systems. The basic rationale is that the higher level processes occur after adequate development of the motor system and the perceptual system. Okay, and so that makes sense. As we are learning to crawl or as we are learning to sit up or reach for things, if we didn't see it and if we didn't have the motor ability to reach out for it, then we're not going to go and try to learn from it and play with it and that kind of thing. So the idea that I know that I can bang my rattle and it makes sounds and I like that comes from the fact that I can see the rattle and perceive that it's there. I realize it's something I can pick up and that it can make sounds, that it has the potential to do that. And so therefore I reach out, pick it up, and make sounds. Well, then after I bang it on something, maybe I realize, what else could I do with this? I can shake it by itself. And so see, there's a learning process there, right? And it's just like with my kids. Think about with cars. When my kids first got cars, it was chew on them. We often do that. Why do we do that? Why do kids put things in their mouth? Okay? Think about that for a minute or two. Why do kids put things in their mouth? Do they taste good? No, not often, right? My little one just tried to put dishwasher soap in his mouth. As I was trying to close the dishwasher door, he got his hand in, and before I could stop him, he put it in his mouth. And so he's like, now he's almost 2. Why is he doing that, right? Well, we have more sensors in our mouth than we do anywhere in our body. And why would that be? Why would we have more sensory information there? Well, because when we first start nursing or first start taking a bottle, right, we need to know that that's pleasurable, calms us down, that kind of thing. We also need to know that that's where we need to put things so we can get nutrition. So therefore, you can see why we still put things in our mouth later on, because we first start to learn to explore with our mouth, because that's where we sense more things. Also tells you why a lot of people, when they are upset or stressed, are eating or smoking, right? Because they've learned to associate the mouth with pleasure, and we calm down when we're young children and that kind of thing. So you can see how all this kind of integrates and goes on, right? So let's go on. Auditory perception. That's the ability to hear, okay, and interpreting what is heard. All right. There is a phonological awareness, the awareness of the different sounds that we have for letters, okay? And we're aware of that, okay? There's discrimination, auditory discrimination. And what that means is, say you're in a class and there's a teacher there, and you may have the overhead lights on, which are often fluorescent, and there might be a slight buzz. Some people hear that and kind of, right, can hear that. And there may be a buzz from the air conditioning unit. I'll look over to my right over here because that's where one is in this room. And so, however, even though we hear all these things, there might be cars going by, there might be a train that goes by, even though we understand that, we discriminate that the person in front of us that is maybe giving the lecture or talking is what we need to be focusing in on. So even though all of these things are going on, we focus in on that. That's discrimination, right? There's also auditory memory. Okay. Now, a good thing about this is we have phones, and a lot of us have different phones that ring differently for different people. Why do we do that? We do that because we have auditory memory. Okay. For instance, in my family, I have a sister who absolutely loves animals, and so therefore her ringtone is a duck sound, and so it goes quack, 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 right? I know it's my sister calling. My husband likes cars, and so his ringtone is a car revving or a motorcycle rev. My mom loves to go to church, and so hers is church bells. My other sister, she and I took a wonderful vacation into the Caribbean, and so it's xylophone music. Ding, 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 ding. Right? Now, I know when I hear that ring who that is. Okay, because of auditory memory. And what's funny is my children do too. They'll hear the duck quacking and they go, there's Aunt Donna. Okay, so see how we have to have that auditory memory. It helps us know when a fire alarm's going off. Oh, that's the fire alarm. We need to leave the building, right? It has us hear our mother's voice and know when we're very, very little there's mommy and we want her. Okay, so you can see where that's going on. Auditory sequencing, that's where we hear things within the sequence, right? We hear what's going on with that. And then auditory blending, where we can blend what we're hearing, and it might mean that we can hear more than one thing at a time and still continue on, and that kind of thing too. So, I have gone ahead here, right? So there's the auditory memory. We already talked about that. It's to be able to store and recall what one's heard, right? Are we able to hear it and then repeat it back, right? Our memory. Auditory sequencing, the order of which something happens in a list, okay? Alphabet, auditory sequencing. Numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a sequencing, okay? Blending, this is where we blend the words, right? Kind of a little different. We can hear what's going on, but we can blend them together. So we see M, we see A, and we see N. I have a son that is just now, he's 4, and he's starting to do this. And so we can go man, that's the word man, okay? So those are some other more concrete examples of the different things that we talked about. Now we have visual perception. And with visual perception, we're going to talk about these different terms, okay? So visual discrimination refers to the ability to differentiate one object from another. Okay, can you find the rabbit with 2 ears and the rabbit with 1 ear, as this says? It's kind of like those where you have a picture and you say, what's different about these two pictures? And you have to look and try to figure out what's different. Okay, some people aren't as good at that, and that's a skill that we can kind of learn. This is also where we learn to match things, identical things, matching shapes, matching letters. Okay, think about that. If we never learned visual discrimination, then we would never be able to learn the alphabet visually, right? Because we wouldn't see it going on. Okay, and then there's figure ground discrimination, and this is where we discriminate something from the background. Okay, like in the example here, you can see that there's something raised. If you look to the right of your screen, you can see that there's something raised on that piece of paper. Even though it's all the same color and same texture, it's there, right? And so figure ground, we understand what's in front and what's, what can kind of be ignored or what's the background. Okay, visual closure, and this is to be able to recognize it even though you don't see all of it. Okay, and there's a great example. A competent reader is able. You realize that word is able even though that you can't see all of it. Okay, and we do this with toys, right? Can a child recognize that's his ball if I cover it up, right? And so, can I recognize that that's a pen when I only see half of it laying under the table? You can understand why we need visual closure, right? It helps us discriminate danger. A long time ago, it would help us discriminate food, right? Oh, look, that looks like a deer leg. I'm going after it. So you can see why we want those kinds of visual discrimination. We also need spatial relations, okay? And this is where we see things with space around them. Okay, and so like say the object in the front there, we either know that that object is bigger or it's closer to us, right? When you look at kind of like the stars on that planet, we realize the one in the middle is either bigger because of the relation to everything around us, or that it's going to be closer to us, right? And then also object and letter recognition. We have the ability to look at the things on the bottom and recognize what they are, okay? We want that kind of thing to go on. I don't know if we went over everything here. Yeah, well, we kind of did. We want to make sure, visual perception, interpreting what we're seeing, figure ground, we talk about that, visual closure, spatial relations, object letter recognition we talked about. We didn't talk about reversals, okay? And this is kind of what I was telling you about earlier with the B, the D, the P, and the M. Okay, you can see how it is very different when you have things that are in, a smiley face is a smiley face, and it doesn't matter if it's upside down or sideways. But the letter B, or the thing that represents the letter B, is different if it's a B, a P, a D, or a Q, depending on which way it is pointing, right? And so that wasn't in, I knew there was one that we didn't discuss, and I wanted to go over that. And then the whole part, perception, we talked about that. So we'll go on. There are different theorists that you need to kind of know about. Newell Kephart, what he did was he believes that we can train perception and motor training by walking on, say, the balance beam, a walking board. That's just a board that maybe moves. A balance board is definitely going to be one that kind of moves, or else one that's like a balance beam, right? You have to put one foot in front of the other and balance, okay? A trampoline. Okay, making angels in the snow and a variety of stunts and games and certain rhythm activities are going to help your perceptual motor training. And so what's going to happen is that these are used often, again, say if you have a stroke or if you have a baby that is not doing very well with walking, they may do something if they think it's a perceptual issue on the board, on this, on that, to get it to go. Marianne Frostig developed a test of visual perception, okay? And so there's a visual perception to see, can we visually perceive what's going on? Can we tell the difference between the foreground and the background, okay? And also Jean Ayres here has the sensory integration theory, okay? Now I'll tell you a little bit about the sensory integration theory. You probably have heard of sensory integration, okay, or SI. And the theory with that is there's something that's not quite right with how we process things, okay? And if we have a problem with sensory integration, what that means is, say you or I are sitting somewhere. And again, we'll go back to the theory of you're in a classroom and you hear the hum of the light above. You hear the hum of the air conditioner or the heater, and you feel the seat beneath you, and you hear somebody over here tapping their pencil, and then there's someone lecturing. Someone that has sensory integration issues cannot ignore the tapping to listen to the conversation. They're zoning in on the tapping, or maybe they're zoning in on the humming of the lights, okay? And so the idea is we can ameliorate this, we can rehab this, so to speak, if we do the right things with these kids. And it often involves things that you see up here on the perceptual motor training. So she's using the Noel Kephardt's kind of stuff, that if we swing, if we trampoline, that these do different things to our body, and it can train our body to pay attention to what's correct. And so there are sensory integration things all over the United States. We use it in birth to 3. I can tell you that when I did research a few years back in birth to 3 and asked them what assistive technology they used, they said they self-reported that they used more sensory technology information than anything. You can go to schools and people will spend $30,000 to $60,000 to build a sensory integration room and all that kind of thing. I will tell you that we have little to no research to back up sensory integration. And a lot of people will say, well, we just need to do more to it because it's there. This theory has been out since the 70s and 80s, and yet we still don't have tons of research to back it up. So it is one of those ideas that we would say is only partially research-based. Okay, and it's interesting to me that we spend thousands upon thousands of dollars, maybe even millions of dollars in the United States yearly on sensory integration when there is not tons of research that backs it up. Okay, so it's kind of like this. I had a kid that I was told by an occupational therapist needed joint compression. Now, what joint compression is you put your hand above and below a joint on somebody, right? So you're talking above and below the elbow, and you pull and then put back, pull and then put back. That was very early in my career. She asked me to do it, and I went, okay. Nowadays, I'd say, no, not going to do that. Because one, we don't have any, there's not a huge literature base saying that works. And two, I was pulling a kid's joint in and out, right? I mean, we weren't taking it out. We were just putting pressure on it. But I could have hurt the kid, too, so I wouldn't do it. All right, now this was supposed to help with concentration. All right, now I had a kid that I did this with that was taking the TCAP exam. And he seemed to do really well whenever he took the TCAP exam. However, looking back on that experience, did he do better? Was he able to focus on that exam? Because one, he was getting a break while I did the sensory stuff, right? Was he getting attention every so often? And so that made him do better. So you can see, we don't know which one of those worked or if any of them worked, right? And often part of the problem is we can't isolate that. You're not going to just do sensory integration. You're going to do sensory integration with, say, speech therapy and all these kinds of things. And so therefore, it's hard to isolate. You don't know what's doing it, It's kind of like with those rooms that I was telling you about, a sensory integration room. The child has the ability, he's not sitting well in class and he's not paying attention. Well, I'm going to go take him to the sensory integration room. We'll do a few things. We'll come back and he'll pay attention. Well, is he now paying attention because he got a break? Is he paying attention now because he was able to go play for a while in something that he really liked and then he's coming back? See, we don't know that it was actually the swinging that caused him to pay more attention. It might be the break from the classroom. It might be the fact that he got to have a little fun or he got one-on-one attention. So you see how we can't really tease out that. And again, we're not seeing the evidence that this works. If we see the evidence that it works later on, I'll be the first one to jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, we need to do this for everyone. But we don't, okay? They now have like sensory integration diets, okay? A child has this diet, he does better. And again, we don't know that any of this really works. The evidence is not there right now. So be careful with sensory integration when you see it. Now, here are things that we have to have integrated. As you notice, listening, speaking, reading, writing, there is a language core. Okay? You have to have all of these abilities to do well with language, with writing and reading later on. Okay? And so often the individuals that don't have an issue maybe with listening or with speaking. Okay? And that's going to affect the reading and the writing. Okay, so you can see how all of this integrates together. There are input skills and output skills, and you can see how this all goes along. We have listening and reading, those kind of go together. There's an integrative process that helps with the speaking and the writing, okay? And in this theory of learning language, you have to be able to listen to it and hear it, interpret it or integrate it, and then you're going to speak, right? So the idea that receptive skills come first in this process, okay? Now, again, we're going to look at theories of how kids learn language. Now, there's several theories. The behaviorist theory, of course, come from Skinner, right? Ding, ding, ding. You hear the word behavior. You're taking the praxis exam, and it talks about behavior, and it gives you a list of who theorized it. You're going to pick Skinner because he's the safe bet, okay? Just like Piaget is the safe bet with development, Skinner's the safe bet for anything that's behavioral, okay? And so he says what happens is we understand language because we're shaped, right? Things happen in our environment and we start learning language. Now, think of this, okay? There's a baby and they're in the bedroom. They're really, really little and they cry, ah, okay? And mommy and daddy come, or mommy comes to feed them. Then later on, they get kind of hungry again and they cry, ah. Then what's happening? The mom comes again. They're starting to learn, hey, I make that sound and this person comes. Okay, now, switch to the child's a little older. They go, let's say da, okay? Da, 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 because that's usually first, right? Poor moms, we give birth to the kids, we feed the kids, and the da is the first sound they make. Why is da typically the first sound? Because it's easier. Think about how little movement you need in your mouth to say da, da. Da, it just kind of falls out, right? With mama, you got lips involved, okay, and you got more motor control involved. That's why mama is later. So we'll use da. The child goes da, 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 da. Now, is the child really saying da, da? We'd say no, they're not. They're making that sound because they can make that sound. But what happens? We get all excited. Ah, look, he's saying da, da, and da, da comes running in. Okay, he makes that sound again. Everybody gets happy, so we're rewarding him, right? With his behavior, we're rewarding his behavior, and this certain person comes in. Or we show him this certain person's picture. Sooner or later, he starts going, hey, this da-da must be da-da. Okay? That's the behaviorist theory of learning language. Because we make the sound and how people react to that sound, we start to learn the language. Like maybe I say buh, and every time I say buh, mom gives me the ball. Oh, look, he's saying ball. I'm going to go get it for him, and we give him the ball. I soon learned to associate buh with this round object that I'm having, so this round object must be buh or ball. Okay, so you can see how this theory works with language. Okay, now there's an innatist theory, and the innatist theory offers a different development or a different idea of language. Okay, and what they say is that the ability to have language is inborn within us. Okay, and we're predisposed to learn language and use language, and that's why we have the universal language for all languages. You know, a baby that is born can literally learn to speak any of the languages. It's because they're in an environment that has English being spoken that they learn sounds, right? It's kind of like, if you've seen A Christmas Story, right? That's one of my favorite movies. It's kind of funny. Or if you think about people that are maybe from China, they have a really hard time with L's and R's. Their language does not have that sound. Does that mean that they're not going to be born with the ability to make that language? No, it doesn't. If you take a child from that culture that is very, very young and expose them to English language, they have not a problem at all developing R and L. But if they've never heard it, they've never used it, they kind of lose that ability. So that's why, and I'll go back to A Christmas Carol or A Christmas Story, when in A Christmas Story, and I hope I'm not giving the plot away, Ralphie's family loses their turkey and they have to go eat Chinese because it's the only place open on Christmas Day, and they're singing Christmas carols, and they go, they're saying, "'Tis the season to be jolly, far-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra." So they're substituting R for L, okay? And we find that funny, right? Because that's not kind of the way we're supposed to hear that song. Well, those individuals are people that hadn't had to use an L, right? And now they're in a language that has it, and they're trying to. So you can see the innatist theory says anybody can learn any language. It's universal, and there's certain things that are universal in all of our languages, such as rhythm or how we speak it or that kind of thing. And all children can learn it because we're hardwired to learn language. Okay. Now, there's a cognitive theory of languages. Okay. And what the cognitive theory does is that the language is acquired from the environment. So what that means is that we're predisposed, but we have some development that happens through interpersonal and social experiences, meaning that because we're social with that child, then they develop our language. If we were to take a boy or a child and put them out on a deserted island by themselves, if they could fend for themselves, and they were by themselves totally and had no need for language, they wouldn't learn language because they're not hearing it. They're not experiencing it. They're not interacting with people. Okay, so the idea with cognitive theory is you have to have the ability, but it's because you're interacting with someone that you're going to develop the language. Okay, so you can see how these different theories are slightly different. Now, which one do you think works? Because if I look at it and I think, which one do I think works, I might think, oh, one works better than the other. I kind of have a theory that you kind of have to have it all. Okay? It makes sense that we're hardwired for language because if you think about it, there's not any other animals really that have language. They might have distress calls. They might be able to develop sign language and that kind of thing, but they don't really have language per se as we do. So humans are hardwired for it. I get that. There needs to be an interaction with other people before we learn language. I get that too, because if we were all alone, we might learn to hum or kind of sing or whatever because it pacifies us and it makes us happy, but we would have no reason to call a tree a tree. So I get that cognitive theory, but I also get the idea that we kind of behavioral, right? In that somebody reacts because we say something they like and we continue to say it. Okay, it's kind of like the kid that says butt face and you laugh, right? We laugh because we say that. Well, then that encourages that kid to continue saying it, right? So I can see how all of these can work together, that none of them alone in my thoughts. And this is the world, this is theories according to Cathy, right? Language theories according to Cathy. I can see how they are all needed to kind of work together to have a child to learn language optimally. So, linguistic systems. These are things that are part of our language that you need to know about, okay? And I'm going to try to give you things to help you remember these terms, okay? First of all, phonology, okay? Phonemes. These are sound units. The P, A, J. Those are all phonemes that are put together and spell the word or say the word page, right? Now, how are we going to remember that? Well, think about phonology, right? It has the word phone in it, okay? So if you think about phonograph, which is a record player, that's the little sounds. A telephone, right? So when you see that, you know that that's going to be sound, okay? Morphology, morphemes, these are meaning units, meaning that we change words, okay? And how are we going to remember that? We're going to remember that by the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. They change into things, right? They morph, as my 4-year-old says. Well, we change words to change meanings, okay? if we have the word civilized, okay, that brings up a connotation of something. But if I put the word un in front of it, uncivilized, then we know that's the opposite, okay? We have duck, and that brings up a picture in my mind of a duck, one. But if we say ducks with an S, that brings up a different image. So you can see how morphemes are things that change the word, that change the meaning. Walk, okay? Walking, that changes the meaning slightly. Walked with an ED, oh, that changes it too, right? So you can see how the words morph, they change, and they change their meaning when they do so. Then there's syntax, okay? And syntax is their grammar, okay? And I don't really have a cool way to do that, so you'll just have to remember that. Syntax is our grammar. And different things have grammar that's different, right? If you've had a different language, in our language, often we might say pretty yellow balloon, but maybe in French they say balloon pretty yellow. Okay, so there might be a different structure in a different language, but each language has its own grammar or its own syntax. Okay, so I'm sorry I don't have a catchy thing to remember that one. And then semantics, okay, is word meaning. And again, I don't have a catchy one for that either. I'm going to have to come up with catchy ways to remember syntax and semantics. But semantics is the word meaning. It is the vocabulary, okay? And the one that's not on here is pragmatics, okay? And I want you to talk about or think about pragmatics. Let's see if it's on later on. It is. We'll talk about pragmatics here in a little bit. So, again, phonology is a system. It's the smallest unit of sound. A phoneme is cat, cat, right? And then morphology, it's how it changes. One boy to two boys. It has different morphemes in it. Syntax, right? Word order and how it goes on. Semantics, the word meaning, right? And so you talk about kids learning it, and if they have difficulty understanding the word meanings, they have a harder time relating to a string of words to make sense, right? And then pragmatics, and again, pragmatics wasn't on the first slide, but pragmatics is the social side of language. Okay, pragmatics is often what we see when we come into the room and somebody goes, "That's just great," right? That's a different pragmatic than "that's just great." Okay, same words, but the pragmatics are different. Okay, and often if we aren't good in pragmatics, we can't interpret what someone is saying. All right, we might think "that's just great" means the same as "that's just great," okay, and it doesn't, right? And we often have a hard time with that. They have problems with pragmatics. People that have problems with pragmatics will stand too close to you, because in the United States we kind of have a 3-foot bubble, okay, and so we kind of understand that that's our personal space, and when we're talking to somebody, we're standing there and we're talking at that. In that way. We might let people that we're more intimate with, that we know more, come into our bubble, like with me holding my kids and they're talking to me and they're right here in my face, okay? That's fine. It would be very awkward if, say, I go to Walmart and the cashier stands that close to me, right? Think of those kind of things. So you can see how certain people have a hard time with pragmatics. It's like I'm trying to teach my son not to interrupt, because pragmatics in our society say that if I'm talking to his father and we're in a conversation, he's not supposed to come up and interrupt. And if I don't teach him that, then when he does that, say, at work or at school, he's going to be thought of, oh, how rude, right? And so, those people that are socially awkward, they're the ones that have those problems with pragmatics. They interrupt when they shouldn't. They may change subjects on us, like maybe there's 3 or 4 of us that are intently talking about football and the upcoming game, right? Well, the person that comes up and goes, "Hey, let's go eat at Dairy Queen." Well, we were right in the middle of a conversation about something else, right? Now, we might be okay with that and go, "Yeah, let's go to Dairy Queen. We can talk about this there." But it also might mean that we think, "What's up with you? You've changed, what we're talking about here," okay? Pragmatics are often an issue with kids with autism, of course, all right? And then sometimes with kids with cognitive abilities that may not be able to read and interpret. So, pragmatics, you got to think of it's social, right, side of it. Listening. Now, we often neglect the element of listening, right? We often don't teach people how to listen, okay? But some people do not have that skill, okay? And here is an interesting fact. Over half the people that are referred for a hearing test don't have a problem with deafness. They have a problem with listening, okay? And so an example of this would be, say I'm talking to my husband and I say, get the mayonnaise, tuna, onions, and tomatoes out of the refrigerator. We're going to make a tuna fish salad or sandwich, right, with tuna fish salad. And he might only get part of that. Okay, he wasn't listening. He's not been trained to listen and to keep in his mind how to get those 4 things out of the refrigerator. Okay, so you can see how this is going to be real trouble for someone in school. Okay, if you've never been given a 2-part command, like go and put your coat up and then come and sit here at the circle, we're about to have circle time, then what's going to happen? You're not used to being given a 2-part command, so you're standing there. What's that mean? That means you're going to either be standing in the coat area and not coming to circle time, or you might come to circle time in your coat. All right, so you can see how we need to have our children understand more than 1-part commands, okay? And you got to think. Different cultures do it differently, all right? Some cultures will often have all kinds of flowy, flowery language and talking all the time. I'm one of those. You could bet that, right? You could bet on that. As we're driving somewhere, I'm often talking to my kids. Did you see that fire truck? Look, there's a Jeep. Ooh, isn't the sky pretty? Okay, think of all the descriptive language I'm doing. Okay, how different would my children be if they were only talked this way? Okay, get in the car, get out of the car, I'm going to make dinner, go watch TV. Okay, see how different that is? If you have a child that comes to Head Start and the teacher's talking in lots of phrases and words, they may have a hard time interpreting it because they've not been taught to listen for the string of commands. If they're used to being only told in 1, then they're not used to being told in 2s and 3s and 4s. So you can see what I'm saying, right, with listening. Language disorder. Language disorder is different from speech, okay? When you hear the word speech means that they're having problems with their speech, okay? Which may mean that they're substituting the words, like my child saying yellow with lello, right, substituting L for Y. That's kind of a speech issue. Now, it's okay for his age, but if he were still 14 and going yellow, we would say he has a speech problem, right? Then there's voice disorders, okay? And voice is different from speech, okay? Because voice is the quality of the sound, right? If I always talk to her like this, you all would think I have a voice disorder. Okay, they're hoarse, or it could be that they're stuttering, right? That's a voice disorder as well, okay? And I will tell you this, there's often a time period where we stutter. It's usually around 3 to 4, and it's where our mind is thinking so fast we can't get the words out. So you might hear some stuttering of a child of that age. That's totally normal. Now, if they're 6 and still talking like this, then there's a problem, right? That's stuttering. And so you have speech disorders, again, not making the sound. Voice disorder, the quality of the voice's sound, like maybe they're too nasal, you know, okay? Or it could be that they have no inflection in their voice, okay? We hear that sometimes with kids with autism. That's a voice disorder. Then there's language disorders. Language is different. It's much broader. Plus, it encompasses a ton of things, okay? It could be problems with vocabulary. Maybe your brain is retrieving the wrong thing all the time. Instead of saying lazy river, right, and that gives you a mental image, you say lazy Susan, which gives you a totally different mental image. Instead of saying hollyhocks, which are flowers that grow in the yard, you say ham hocks, which are ham meat that you eat. Okay, so, totally different things. So you're retrieving the wrong word there, okay? So it could be having problems of delayed speech. It could be problems with the entire spectrum of communication. It could be the concept of formation. You always say gooses instead of geese. You don't ever go on to understand that geese is two and we don't say gooses, okay? Or it could be that you're having problems of grammatical rules or syntax, right, or poor language. Okay, a language disorder could be that you don't understand how to interact with someone. Okay, and so you can see how you may be going to speech. We always in school systems talk about, oh, they're going out to speech. Well, it may not be for speech, it may be for voice. It may be that I'm trying to teach them to have inflection, okay, or not sound monotone. Or it could be that they're having problems with language and I'm trying to give them more language. I'm trying to get them to use it correctly and appropriately. So you can see there's various things that are encompassed whenever you have speech-language pathology. Okay, so expressive language disorders is often called aphasia. And what that means is a child that has this are going to depend on pointing. Okay, they can understand it, but they can't produce it often when they have problems with this. Okay, so they do well on nonverbal tasks, but they have difficulty whenever they're trying to tell you something. Okay, it's like their brain is not talking to their mouth, and even though they understand it and they hear it, they can't produce it. Okay, and a kind of idea about this is I had a kid that I worked with, and he was 4, and he was saying, he would say, "I love you, Miss Baffy." Okay, so love is love instead of love, and he would use "b" for my name instead of the "k," Cathy sound. And I'd say, "I love you, Milton," and he'd go, "No, love, I love you." Now, he could hear that I was saying it wrong, right? Whenever I would say love instead of love, he was aware that I said it incorrectly. He didn't have the muscle ability to say it correctly himself. Okay, so you can see a form of aphasia there. Now, non-standard English. This is very different. We often use non-standard English, okay? If you think of Ebonics, okay? And that's often in the African American community, right? And like I had a student that when I was teaching in higher education that would say, "Do anyone out there hear me?" on an online language class, okay? Now, standard English would be, "Does anyone out there hear me?" But she was using the "Do anyone out there hear me?" Okay, so you can see how that's very different. We often have non-standard English in this portion of the United States too. Okay, and in the Appalachian region, you often hear "don't" used for "doesn't." Don't that make a pretty picture? Okay, instead of "doesn't that make a pretty picture?" All right, and you're going to hear that kind of thing. And another example, this was when I was teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I had a child who scored perfect on the TCAPs. I don't know if you're a teacher and you look at a TCAP score and it has an asterisk on it. They used to denote a perfect score by that. They may not do that anymore. But that meant he got every question correct. Okay, and he got every question correct in math and then in one other portion of the TCAP. He was a brilliant child. And yet he would call tomatoes maters. And I'd say, "Jimmy, don't do that." And he said, "Well, that's the way we call them on the farm. We call them maters." And I said, "I understand that." I said, "You're highly intelligent. You want to go to college one day. People are going to laugh at you if you call them maters when you get to college. And so what you're going to have to do is," they call it code switching, okay? And it's the idea that when we talk to one set of people, we use one set of language, but when we talk to another set of people, it may be very different. When you get to know me better, you may, and I love to tell stories. Of course, you probably have realized that in my teaching because I often use vignettes to illustrate things. But when I get into storytelling mode, I often go back into my Appalachian cultural mode, right? I use more non-standard English and that kind of thing because that's where I was brought up. That's the way I was raised. It's funny because sometimes I don't code switch as well, and I might say something like ameliorate to my family and friends, and they look at me like, "Oh yeah, we're using a different word, aren't we? Big word." I didn't code switch back to what I was. And it's not that it's more simplistic necessarily. It's that that we just say it different. And it's kind of like this. I had a colleague when I was teaching in West Virginia. There was 2 of us from Tennessee area, Dandridge area and Knoxville area. So we had very similar non-standard English phrases and things that we would say and do, right? We were with someone from Buffalo, New York, okay? She had a very different non-standard language, right? We would all use the standard language, understand each other fine. But when we all 3 were together, me and these other 2 colleagues, the one from Buffalo at one point said, I know you're speaking English. I haven't a clue what you're saying. Well, see, we were using, well, she may not have said I haven't a clue. She may have said it some other way, but I have no idea what you're saying, whatever. But we do this and we don't realize it often. And we laughed about that we could all speak English, yet he and I, when we would get into our colloquial speaking, what we speak in the region, she didn't understand. I've had this happen to me when I travel. So say it happened, I think, in Chicago and in Boston, okay? Now, both places, and this was before there were so many people that use credit cards for everything, and almost every store takes them, right? Sometimes in the South, you run across a store that takes only cash, right? And so at both times, I asked the person, you take cash only? All right? Now, in the South, or in our region, if you say, do you take cash only? We're not looking for somebody to know if they take cash. We're actually, they call it backward speaking, right? We're actually asking if they take credit cards as well. So in the South, if you ask, do you take cash only? They'll say, no, we take cash and checks and credit cards. Okay? Now, I went to somewhere that didn't speak this way, and I go, you take cash only? And they go, yes, we take cash. And so they took it to mean, was I asking, do you take cash? And see, when I'm on trips, it's like I want to keep my cash because if I need a cab to tip or something. So I was like, oh man, they only take cash. And so I paid in cash. And then I noticed the person behind me pays in a credit card. And I was like, oh man, that's a very good example of me using non-standard English in a place that was not used to that English, and they didn't know what I was asking. And so I got the wrong answer. Okay, you see what I'm saying? How different. We have different dialects in the United States, and we may take something to mean something different. Okay, and so we have to be very careful about that. We have to use standard English when we're communicating around and with everybody, and we often go back into our non-standard English, especially when we go back home or we're around friends and that kind of thing. We use something that's very different. So we'll go on. That is the end of the slideshow for this. We talked about how Birth to 3 services go. We talked about how some of the laws. We talked about some language issues that you might see out there and how the brain works. And I will see you in the next module. Thanks for coming along, and I'll see you soon. Bye.